Springboks too good for Japan. The Rugby World Cup quarterfinal, 26 points to 3. Pretty comfortable in the end for the Springboks. If you're looking at that halftime score, it was certainly a pretty close game. It was pretty tense, and then when we look at the stats, which I'll go over shortly, you can certainly see the way the game shifted throughout the time the game was played. I should say though that the atmosphere created by the Japanese fans and the South African visiting fans was fantastic. It was loud, and both sets of fans really getting into the game, which was great to see. Springboks got on the board early through Mapimpi, who's a guy who gets a fair bit of criticism, I guess, for his selection. Everyone loves Nkosi, but Rassi persists with Mapimpi, and perhaps we've seen a bit why. He got 2 tries in this game. He got the first one on 4 minutes. South African scrum. Off the back of that, Fafta gets the ball to Mapimpi, and he runs over for a try, beats Tamura cold. It's kind of a half chance that he turns into a full chance with his good attacking play. The conversion is missed, which is a slight concern with the goal kicking for South Africa in this game, but it is 5-0. Another slight concern was the Beast's yellow card on 9 minutes. He had Inagaki, his opposite number, basically the other loose head, and he kind of picked him up and dumped him. He's lucky that he landed on his shoulder rather than anywhere higher, otherwise it could have been worse, but it was fine. He got a straight yellow. He did his time in the bin, and during that time, that's when Japan did manage to get their penalty. But that's all they were able to do. They put a lot of pressure on, but the Springboks defence held really well. Lapis Labuschagne for Japan did go off for an HIA during that period, but he came back on about 10 minutes later. Japan went 13 phases in that yellow card time. Fukuoka had a line break, which is something we didn't say that often during this game. Damon Delenda, though, won a fantastic turnover when they were about 5 metres out, so the box defence, as I said, was just immense. And eventually, though, Japan did win a scrum penalty, and it was that allowed them to get the penalty kick on the board. So that was their only points of the game. It was 3 points to 5. The yellow card conceded 3 points for the Springboks, so ultimately not too costly because you probably average around about 7. And that's the way it went in at half time. I mean, as the game kind of went on, there were more chances for the Springboks becoming apparent. I mean, almost had an intercept, but he fell over and wasn't able to make anything from it. They were finding themselves in the Japanese half, kind of from about the 30-minute mark. They conceded a penalty at line-out time, though, which was unfortunate. They had an overlap, and then threw the ball to Mapimpi's feet. And LaRue at one point just dropped the ball clean cold. So, yeah, the chances were there, but South Africa were kind of their own worst enemies. After holding out the Japanese for such a long time, when they wanted to go on the attack, they weren't able to get some cohesive play going on. They did win a penalty. It was probably 50 metres out, but with the angle, maybe 55, just before halftime, but they decided not to go for the poles. I think Pollard probably has a big enough boot, but maybe his boot hasn't been that accurate this World Cup, so they decided to go for touch. And eventually, Damon Delende was denied a try due to being, I guess, tackled, and he got back up to play the ball again. I think probably, and I haven't checked the rule books, but by the letter of the law, it's probably correct because he did have both knees and a hand on the ground at one time, and I think a defender was at least partially on him, so that's tackled. Even if by what we know as a tackle, if you're mucking around on the rugby field at lunchtime, probably doesn't seem to be held in the tackle. But either way, they gave away a penalty there, so there was no try. And I think if some guys mentioned it when I was live streaming, that if as he was on the ground with those 2 knees in his hand, if he'd let the ball go, released it, and then picked it back up, he probably would have been fine. But it's a split-second thing. So, that's how it went at half-time, 5 points to 3. Very low scoring, very tight. Japan had more possession, 68%. Territory, 68%. But if you look at the run meters, it was 169 Japan, 132 South Africa. So South Africa with a lot less ball, doing a lot more with it. Tackling percentages, both sides in the 80s, 84% Japan, 87% South Africa. South Africa making a lot more tackles, 79, than Japan's 26. So I guess that first half was Japan's chance to get on the board while they had the ball down the South African end, but all they could manage was 3 points. Penalties conceded was 6 to South Africa, 2 to Japan. Knock-ons, though, was 7 to South Africa, 4 to Japan, despite having that little ball. South Africa were knocking it on. So this is what I mean about them being kind of their own worst enemies. They did manage, though, to turn that around in the second half, as is evident by the board. South Africa got a penalty on 43 minutes, made it 8 points to 3. They had another try chalked off with a forward pass from Leroux to Peter Steph-Tutoy. They showed the angle pretty much side on, and it did seem to travel forward out of his hands, so no try. They had a huge scrum on 47 minutes, and that was another penalty for South Africa, 11 points to 3. Another big scrum on 57 minutes. It was really just getting dominant with those forwards, but Pollard missed that kick, so unable to convert the points. Japan conceded a high tackle penalty on 62, so another penalty, 14 points to 3. And then you're probably starting to breathe a bit easier if you're a South African fan, starting to pull away with the game a bit. And Japan just in their own half for so much of that second half, really unable to create much. Finally, South Africa gets a try. 66 minutes, Faf de Klerk, a guy who gets much maligned for all the box kicking he does, but obviously it's a tactic. The South African maul goes about half the field, it feels like, and eventually Marks peels off. He's getting tackled. He's got a magic offload to Faf de Klerk, who goes over for the try. That makes it 21 points to 3. At that point, it's looking kind of like game over because there's not that long to go. And as I said, Japan in the second half weren't able to create much. Japan did get a penalty, kind of 68 minutes. They put it into South Africa's half. They went to touch. Good attacking opportunity, but Peter Steph-Tutoy steals their line-out ball. They get the ball back. They're able to attack for a bit, but then the ball bobbles loose. Pollard gets it. He gets it to Leroux. Leroux gets it to Mpimpi. And Mpimpi's still got a bit of work to do, but again, does enough. He gets the try. It's unconverted. 26 points to 3 is the way it finished. So it was very tight at halftime, but pretty comfortable in the end for the Springboks. So over the course of the 80 minutes, just too good. Final stats. Run meters 304 to 247. That's in South Africa's favour, so they really came back. Possession and territory evened up a bit. Territory was 50-50 in the end, and 54-46 to Japan for possession. But if you look at the second half, possession for South Africa was 69%, and possession was 61, territory was 69. So really just bossed that second half like nobody's business. Penalties conceded evened out to 8 apiece because Japan were the ones under the pressure in that second half. Ireland got a lot of stick in the press for their offload count against New Zealand. I think it was 12-2 or something like that. This game, Japan offloaded 14 times, South Africa 3. But look at the scoreboard. So it's not just offloads that get you the win. It has to be a combination of everything. And the way South Africa controlled the game, controlled their possession, more their territory with their kicking and whatnot. So the defensive line getting up was just able to force mistakes from Japan and able to give them points when needed. The forwards with the scrum, just too much. Tackling percentages both in the 80s. South Africa made 120 tackles, Japan 77. So South Africa can thank their defense for much of what was able to be created by their attack. Goal kicking percentage is one thing you'd be a bit worried about going into a semi-final if you're a South African fan. 57%. I mean, Japan's at 100, but they only had the one shot. So not quite sure what's going on with Andre Pollard's boot at the moment. There were a fair few. Sorry, it is late. It is 1:48 a.m. I'm about to go to bed, but there were a few flat passes in this game. Wayne Barnes, pretty notorious in New Zealand back in the day for that kind of thing, but it didn't cost anybody in this game. Individuals, Matsushima for Japan had 56 run meters. Lapis Labuskakani had 3 defenders beaten. So did Michael Leach. But in the scheme of things, some games have had double figures for defenders beaten. So to keep it to 3 for the best guys for Japan shows how good South Africa's defense was. More though, 13 out of 13 tackles. That guy continues to impress for Japan. For South Africa, Mpimpi, 116 run meters. Remember I mentioned People don't give him enough credit. He was top class. Three clean breaks, 5 defenders beaten. Diaka, 15 out of 15 tackles. Damon Dealende, 14 out of 15 tackles. De Klerk, 1 try and 1 try assist. So all guys who've copped a bit of criticism in the past, but really showed up in this one for South Africa. So yeah, over 80 minutes. South Africa, a very hard team to beat. So they go on to play Wales in their semi-final, while England take on New Zealand. So very interesting times. You guys let me know your thoughts on the game. How well did you think South Africa played? Do you think it was Rassie's words at halftime that made the difference? Do you think it was just Japan unable to keep up those performance levels of that first half for the whole game? South Africa maybe working out what Japan were doing with some of those cross kicks that they were doing and whatnot. But yeah, you guys let me know your thoughts. I'm going to go to bed. Talk to you again soon. See you later.